What would you do if your wife sent you a candid video with her coworkers putting her in a prone position and being satisfied on New Year's Eve? That's exactly what happened to me. I'll tell you how I dealt with her. It was New Year's Eve, and I remember the house buzzing with nervous excitement. My wife, Lila, had been getting ready for her office party for hours. The outfit, the makeup, the constant checking of her phone. It all seemed innocent enough, but there was something off about her energy that night. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I brushed it aside. She'd always been the life of the party, and maybe this was just another night of her playing that role. "Don't wait up," she teased, grabbing her coat and giving me a quick kiss on the cheek. Her perfume lingered in the air as the door closed behind her, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the faint sound of fireworks popping in the distance. I wasn't much for parties, so I'd opted to stay home, thinking I'd see the new year in with a good book and some peace and quiet. The hours ticked by, the TV droning in the background, and midnight came and went. Lila hadn't sent a single message all night, not even the usual Happy New Year text. It wasn't until around 2 a.m. that my phone buzzed. I reached for it, expecting a harmless, tipsy, on my way home message. Instead, my heart stopped. The images started rolling in, one after the other. Photos and videos of Lila, laughing, writhing, tangled in a blur of bodies. 3 of her coworkers, men I vaguely remembered from her stories, were in the frame, their hands and mouths all over her. The captions that followed turned my stomach. "Hope you like this," she'd written with a winking emoji. "You always said you wanted to see me wild." I froze, the images burning into my mind. The way she looked in them, so carefree, so unlike the woman I thought I knew, sent a chill down my spine. A part of me wanted to believe it was a joke, some twisted prank, but the raw intimacy of those videos crushed any hope of that. My chest tightened, and my vision blurred. What was she thinking? Did she really believe I'd be okay with this? My hand hovered over the trash can by the front door. It was already filled with her old clothes, jewelry, and keepsakes I'd stuffed in there while watching those videos play on loop. By the time she stumbled through the door at 3:30 a.m., giggling like nothing was wrong, I was ready. Her things were waiting for her outside, and so was the truth. As soon as the door creaked open, her voice filled the room, high-pitched, happy, and slightly slurred. "Babe, you wouldn't believe the night I had," she exclaimed, wobbling slightly as she kicked off her heels. Her bag hit the floor with a thud, and she turned to me with a radiant smile. "Happy New Year, sweetheart." I didn't respond. Couldn't. I just stood there, arms folded, my jaw locked so tight I thought it might snap. She didn't notice, too busy fumbling with her coat and humming some pop song I'd heard a dozen times on the radio. It was only when her eyes met mine that her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone suddenly cautious, almost offensive. She cocked her head to the side, the way she always did when she thought I was being overly serious. "Don't tell me you're mad I stayed out late. I did tell you not to wait up." I didn't say anything at first. Instead, I reached for my phone, opened the gallery, and handed it to her. Her smile disappeared completely as her eyes scanned the screen, her face draining of color. The first few photos seemed to hit her like a slap, but as she scrolled through the videos, her expression shifted, shock, confusion, then something I hadn't expected, a smirk. "Oh," she said softly, almost laughing. "So, you saw those?" Her nonchalance stunned me into silence. I couldn't understand it. Wasn't she supposed to be horrified? Ashamed? Instead, she looked at me like I was the one overreacting, like I'd stumbled into some private joke I didn't get. "Lila," I finally managed, my voice low and trembling. What is this?" She shrugged, swaying slightly on her feet. "I thought you'd like it. You know, spice things up. You've mentioned, what's the word? Cuckolding before, haven't you?" Her words hit me like a freight train. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice rising despite my effort to stay calm. "You think I wanted this?" To watch you. Not watch, she interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. Just be in the loop. I thought it'd be fun. You always said I should let loose more, didn't you? I stared at her, barely able to process what I was hearing. Her tone was casual, almost amused, as if we were discussing a movie I didn't enjoy. This isn't letting loose, Lila, I snapped. This is betrayal. You slept with 3 of your coworkers, for God's sake. And you thought sending me proof would be some kind of turn-on? Her smirk faltered for the first time, and I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. I thought, she began, but her voice trailed off. She looked down at the phone in her hand, as if seeing the images for the first time. I mean, I thought we were open to this kind of thing. We're not, I said firmly, grabbing the phone from her grasp. We never were. For a moment, there was silence between us. The kind of silence that feels louder than shouting, heavier than any words. Her expression shifted again, this time to something like panic, though it was hard to tell through the haze of alcohol. Okay, she said quickly, holding up her hands. I messed up. I must have read things wrong. But it's not like it's the end of the world, right? I mean, it's just... My voice cracked, the rage I'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. Do you even hear yourself right now? This wasn't some little mistake, Lila. This was calculated, planned. You went to that party knowing what you were going to do, and then you documented it like a sick souvenir. Her face crumpled then, her confidence shattering like glass. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to hurt you. But the damage was already done. I could see it in her eyes, the way she finally seemed to grasp the depth of her mistake. Still, part of me wondered if she was sorry for what she'd done, or simply for being caught. I stepped aside and gestured toward the door. Your things are outside, I said coldly. I think it's best if you leave. She looked at me, stunned. You're serious? As serious as you were when you hit send. Her eyes welled up with tears, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. Whatever excuses she was about to make, whatever apologies she thought might fix this, I wasn't ready to hear them. Not tonight. Without another word, she turned and walked out, leaving the door ajar behind her. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway, the cold winter air creeping in and wrapping around me like a shroud. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. The fallout from that night was far from over. Lila's departure was only the beginning, and what came next was messier and darker than I ever could have imagined. The house felt eerily quiet after Lila left, like the air had been sucked out along with her. I stood there for a long time, staring at the open door, the cold wind biting at my skin. My mind was racing, anger, betrayal, confusion, all swirling together in a storm I couldn't escape. Finally, I forced myself to move. I shut the door, locked it, and leaned against it, letting out a shaky breath. Her things were outside in the trash bin, but I knew this wasn't over. It couldn't be. There would be texts, calls, maybe even an unexpected knock on the door. Lila wasn't the type to let things end quietly, not without a fight. But I was determined to stay firm. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat at the kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows across the room. My phone buzzed, and my chest tightened. It was her. I hesitated before picking it up, the screen glowing with her name. Her message was short, almost frantic. Please, can we just talk? I didn't reply. I couldn't. What was there to say? That everything was fine? That I could somehow forget the images she'd sent, the way she'd smiled in those videos like it was all some game? No. This wasn't something a quick conversation could fix. Another message came through. It was a mistake, okay? I thought it was what you wanted. Please, let me come back so we can talk about it. I turned the phone face down on the table, unwilling to read any more. The whiskey burned as it went down, but it did little to dull the ache in my chest. The trust I'd built with her, the life we'd shared. It all felt like a lie now. How long had she been capable of something like this? Had there been other nights, other mistakes, that I didn't know about? The questions gnawed at me, each one more painful than the last. But what scared me most was the tiny voice in the back of my mind, the one whispering that maybe this was my fault. Had I missed the signs? Was there something I'd said or done that made her think this was okay? I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. No, this wasn't on me. This was her choice, her betrayal. The hours dragged on, and I found myself pacing the living room, replaying the events of the night in my head. I couldn't stop thinking about those videos, the way she'd so confidently sent them as if expecting praise. The audacity of it all made my blood boil. Then, the phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message, it was a call. I stared at the screen, watching her name flash over and over. My finger hovered over the decline button, but something stopped me. Against my better judgment, I answered. What do you want, Lila? My voice was cold, sharper than I intended. She hesitated on the other end, the sound of her breathing filling the silence. I just want to explain, she said finally, her voice cracking. Please, can you give me that? I gritted my teeth. Explain what, exactly? That you thought sleeping with 3 men at the same time was a good idea? That you thought I'd be turned on by it? What could you possibly say to make this better? I made a mistake, she said quickly, her words tumbling over each other. I thought you'd like it. I thought it would make us closer, somehow. I know it sounds crazy, but… Closer? I cut her off, my voice rising. You call this closer? You humiliated me, Lila. You shattered everything we built together. And for what? Some twisted fantasy? Her voice broke then, a sob escaping before she could stop it. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I just wanted to be exciting for you. I don't know what I thought. I closed my eyes, trying to rein in the anger that threatened to consume me. Lila, I said slowly, you didn't just hurt me. You destroyed us. And I don't know if that's something we can ever come back from. The silence on her end was deafening. For a moment, I thought she might have hung up, but then she spoke again, her voice barely audible. Please don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Just tell me what to do. I wanted to laugh, to scream, to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, start by leaving me alone. I need time and space. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't waver. Good night, Lila, I said firmly, ending the call before she could say another word. I set the phone down and stared out the window, the dark sky dotted with faint stars. I knew this was just the beginning of the fallout. There would be more conversations, more pleas, and maybe even more revelations. But for now, I needed to figure out how to pick up the pieces of my shattered world. The next day would bring more questions than answers, and an unexpected twist I didn't see coming. The next morning, I woke up groggy, my head pounding from the whiskey and the emotional wreckage of the night before. The house was still, the kind of silence that felt oppressive rather than peaceful. I dragged myself to the kitchen, made a cup of coffee, and tried to piece together what the next step would be. I didn't get far in my thoughts before there was a knock at the door. My first reaction was dread. I didn't need to guess who it was. Lila. She'd never been good at giving space, and I could already hear her tearful pleas in my mind. I debated not answering, but the knocking grew more insistent, followed by a muffled voice. Please, let me in. Just talk to me. I sighed, setting the coffee mug down and heading to the door. When I opened it, my breath caught. Lila stood there, shivering slightly in the morning chill. She wore nothing but a long trench coat tied at the waist, her hair still slightly damp from what must have been a rushed shower. The look in her eyes wasn't just desperate, it was determined. Can I come in? She asked softly, her voice trembling. I hesitated, my hand still gripping the edge of the door. Lila, I told you I needed time. What are you doing here? I couldn't sleep, she said, stepping closer. I couldn't stop thinking about us, about how much I've messed up. Her voice faltered, and she glanced away, then back at me, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. I wanted to show you how much you mean to me, how much I'm willing to fight for us. Before I could respond, she untied the coat, letting it fall open just enough to reveal her bare skin beneath. My stomach twisted, not with desire, but with a sickening mix of anger and disbelief. Lila, I said sharply, my voice cutting through the moment like a knife. What the hell are you doing? She froze, her confidence wavering. I thought maybe this could remind you of how much we love each other, of what we have. What we had, I corrected, my tone colder than I intended. And this isn't the way to fix it. Her face crumpled, and she quickly pulled the coat closed again, clutching it tightly around her. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered, her voice breaking. I feel like I'm losing you, and I don't know how to stop it. I stepped back, putting more distance between us. You think showing up like this is going to erase what happened? That it's going to make me forget the pictures, the videos, the betrayal? Her tears spilled over then, streaming down her cheeks as she shook her head. No, I don't know. I just wanted to make you feel something other than anger. To remind you that I love you. Her words stung, but not in the way she intended. They felt hollow, desperate. A last-ditch effort to reclaim something that had already been shattered. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. Lila, you need to leave, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. No, she pleaded, stepping toward me. Please, just let me stay. Let me explain. Let me try to make this right. I shook my head, my resolve hardening. You can't make this right. Not like this. Showing up at my door, half naked, thinking that's enough to undo everything you've done. It's not just insulting. It's pathetic. Her face twisted in pain, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she took a shaky step back, her shoulders slumping. I just wanted to fix us, she whispered. I didn't know how. You can start by respecting my boundaries, I said firmly. If you ever really loved me, Lila, you'll give me the space I asked for. She stared at me, her lips trembling as if she wanted to say more, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she nodded, pulling the coat tighter around her and turning toward the door. As she stepped out into the cold, she paused, looking back at me one last time. I'm sorry, she said, her voice barely audible. For everything. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just watched as she walked away, her figure disappearing down the street, leaving me alone once again. That should have been the end of it. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. Little did I know, Lila wasn't done fighting. And her next move would bring consequences I never saw coming. The next few days passed in a blur of avoidance. I buried myself in work, spending long hours at the office and returning home only when exhaustion left me no other choice. I kept my phone on silent most of the time, ignoring the buzz of messages and calls I knew were from Lila. Her attempts to reach me grew more frequent, texts pleading for forgiveness, voicemails begging for a second chance. Each one only cemented my decision to keep my distance. I thought I'd made it clear that I needed space. But then, one evening, she crossed a line I didn't even realize she was willing to cross. It started with a knock at the door. Not frantic like before, but measured and deliberate. My stomach sank as I approached, already knowing who it would be. When I opened the door, there she was again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was Ethan, one of the coworkers I recognized from the videos. Lila, I said, my voice low and tense. What the hell is this? She smiled nervously, glancing between me and Ethan. I thought maybe it would help if you talked to someone else about it, she stammered. Someone who was there. Someone who... Stop, I snapped, holding up a hand. You brought him here? Are you serious? Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. "Look, man," he started, his tone overly casual. "I didn't want to come, but she insisted. She said you needed to hear the truth from me." "The truth?" I barked, my temper flaring. "What truth? That you slept with my wife? That you thought it'd be a fun group activity? What could you possibly say that I haven't already seen?" Lila stepped forward, her expression desperate. "It wasn't like that," she pleaded. "It wasn't about hurting you. I swear. It was just stupid, reckless fun. I thought." "That's enough." I cut her off, my voice like ice. I turned to Ethan, glaring at him with all the rage I'd been holding back. "You've said your piece. Now leave." "Fine," Ethan muttered, backing away. "I didn't want to be here anyway." He shot Lila a look that seemed more annoyed than apologetic before heading down the driveway. Lila, however, stayed rooted to the spot. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Do you really think dragging him here is going to make things better?" "I just wanted you to see," she said, her voice cracking. "To understand that it wasn't love or anything like that. It didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I repeated, my fists clenching at my sides. "It meant enough for you to betray me, to send me those videos like it was some kind of gift. You don't get to decide what it meant." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't soften. "Not this time." "I can't lose you," she whispered. "Please, tell me how to fix this." "You can't," I said bluntly. "You already broke it." She reached for me then, her hand trembling as it brushed my arm. I stepped back instinctively, the distance between us feeling more necessary than ever. "You need to leave, Lila," I said, my voice firm. "And don't come back. I mean it." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded, wiping at her tears with trembling hands. "Okay," she said softly. "But if you change your mind—" "I won't." Her breath hitched, and she turned, walking away with slow, heavy steps. I watched until she disappeared down the street, the weight of her departure settling heavily on my chest. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the silence deafening. My mind replayed the confrontation over and over, dissecting every word, every emotion. Lila's desperation had been genuine, but it wasn't enough to erase what she'd done, or the damage it had caused. As I stared at the empty space where she'd stood, a new thought crept into my mind, one I couldn't ignore. If this was how far she was willing to go to win me back, what else was she capable of? The following days were an exercise in restraint. My phone became both my constant companion and my worst enemy, buzzing every few hours with messages and notifications. At first, I ignored them, refusing to even glance at the content. But curiosity, dangerous and relentless, eventually got the better of me. It started with a simple message, "I miss you." I stared at the screen, debating whether to delete it outright. But before I could decide, another one popped up. "Please don't ignore me. I still love you. Let me prove it." I sighed, setting the phone down and trying to focus on the report I was working on. But the messages kept coming, each one more desperate than the last. Eventually, they shifted tone entirely. "I want to remind you of what we had, what we still have." Attached to the message was a photo. Lila, sprawled on a bed I didn't recognize, wearing a sheer lace lingerie set that left almost nothing to the imagination. Her expression was sultry, her lips parted just enough to suggest she was whispering something only I could hear. I swore under my breath and tossed the phone onto the couch. This wasn't helping. If anything, it was making everything worse. But before I could put it out of my mind, the phone buzzed again. Another photo, this time in a different outfit, a nurse costume, complete with a tiny skirt and a plunging neckline that barely covered her chest. The caption read, "Come take your medicine, doctor." A mix of emotions churned in my chest, anger, sadness, longing. I hated that she knew exactly how to get under my skin, to tap into the memories of the passion we'd once shared. But those memories were tainted now, poisoned by her betrayal. The photos kept coming, each one more provocative than the last. A French-made costume, a corset and thigh-high stockings, even a sleek black dress with a slit that left almost nothing to the imagination. She was relentless, each image paired with a message that alternated between playful and pleading. You know you still want me. Tell me you don't miss this. Just one night. Let me make it up to you. And then the videos started. The first one caught me off guard. I hadn't been expecting anything more than photos, so when I opened the file, the sound of her voice filled the room. She was lying on the bed, the same lace lingerie from earlier hugging her curves as she whispered my name, her hands roaming her body in a way that made my pulse quicken despite myself. I know you're mad, she said, her voice low and breathy, but I also know you can't stay away forever. You need me just as much as I need you. I closed the video halfway through, my hands shaking as I set the phone aside. I felt trapped, cornered by a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle. She wasn't just crossing boundaries, she was obliterating them. The next video was even bolder. She was on her knees this time, the camera angle leaving little to the imagination as she moaned softly, calling my name in a way that once would have driven me wild. But now, it only made my stomach churn. I didn't know how to respond, or if I even should. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to demand she stop this insanity. But another part, the part that still remembered the good times, felt drawn to the way she moved, the way she spoke. It was maddening, a war between my heart and my head. The flood of messages didn't stop. Each one chipped away at my resolve, forcing me to confront feelings I'd been trying to suppress. And yet, I couldn't shake the memory of those videos she'd sent me on New Year's Eve, the ones that had shattered everything we'd built together. Eventually, I did the only thing I could think of. I blocked her number. The silence that followed was both a relief and a void. But I knew it wouldn't last. Lila wasn't one to give up easily, and if this was the length she was willing to go to, I had no doubt she'd find another way to get to me. As the days went by, I tried to focus on moving forward. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Lila's desperation was growing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that her next move would be even more reckless and even harder to ignore. For a few blissful days, there was silence. No buzzing phone, no incessant reminders of Lila's attempts to seduce me back into her life. Blocking her number had given me a reprieve, and for the first time since New Year's Eve, I felt a shred of control returning, but I should have known better than to think it would last. It started subtly, a knock on the door late one evening. I ignored it at first, assuming it was a delivery or maybe a neighbor. But then it came again, louder this time. I glanced through the peephole, my stomach sinking as I saw her standing there, dressed in a long black coat and holding a small bag. Lila, I muttered under my breath. She looked different this time, less composed, her makeup smeared slightly as if she'd been crying. I didn't want to let her in, didn't want to give her another chance to manipulate the situation. But something about the way she stood there, shivering in the cold, made me pause. I opened the door a crack. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my tone cold. Her eyes met mine, glistening with unshed tears. "I had nowhere else to go," she said softly. "Please, just let me talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I hesitated, torn between slamming the door and hearing her out. Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. 5 minutes, I said firmly, and then you leave. She nodded, slipping inside and setting her bag down by the door. "Thank you," she whispered. She pulled off her coat, revealing yet another provocative outfit, a sheer red negligee that left little to the imagination. My jaw clenched as I realized this was yet another of her attempts to seduce me. She wasn't here to apologize, not really. This was just another ploy. "Seriously, Lila?" I said, my voice sharp. "This again?" She flinched, but quickly recovered, taking a step toward me. "I'm trying to show you how much I care," she said, her tone soft but insistent. "I'm trying to remind you of what we have." "What we had," I corrected, backing away. "And this isn't how you fix it. If anything, it's just making things worse." Her lower lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might break down. But instead, she took another step forward, her hands reaching for mine. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I hurt you in ways I can't take back. But I love you. And I know you still love me too." "Love doesn't look like this," I said, pulling my hands away. "Love doesn't involve betrayal and manipulation. And it sure as hell doesn't involve showing up at someone's door half-dressed, thinking that'll fix everything." Her shoulders sagged, the weight of my words finally seeming to sink in. "I don't know what else to do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm losing you, and I don't know how to stop it." I ran a hand through my hair, pacing the room as I tried to collect my thoughts. "You've already lost me, Lila," I said finally. "And every time you pull something like this, you just push me further away." She sank onto the couch, her head in her hands. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she said, her voice muffled. "I just wanted to feel alive again. And now I've ruined everything." I turned to face her, my anger tempered by a flicker of pity. "Lila," I said softly, "you need help. Real help. Not this. Not me. Whatever it is you're looking for, you're not going to find it here." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "Please," she said, reaching for me again. "Just give me one more chance." I shook my head, stepping back toward the door. "I can't," I said, "and you need to leave." She hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for her coat. "If I leave now," she said, her voice shaking, "I don't think I'll be able to come back." "That's the point," I said firmly, opening the door and gesturing for her to go. She stood there for a long moment, staring at me as if hoping I'd change my mind. But when I didn't, she finally stepped out into the cold, wrapping her coat tightly around herself. "I hope you can forgive me someday," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of sorrow and resignation. I didn't respond. I just closed the door, locking it behind her and leaning against it with a heavy sigh. I knew this wasn't the end. Lila wasn't the type to let go so easily. But for now, at least, the house was mine again, and I clung to that fragile sense of peace, even as I wondered what her next move would be. The days after Lila's visit were quiet, too quiet. I kept expecting her to show up again, or to find another flood of messages when I turned on my phone. But there was nothing. No calls, no emails, no unexpected knocks at the door. It was almost as if she'd finally given up. For a while, I didn't trust the silence. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting her to appear out of nowhere with another desperate plea. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized this might actually be the end. Then, one evening, I found a letter in my mailbox. No envelope, just a single folded sheet of paper with my name scrawled on the front in her familiar handwriting. My heart sank as I unfolded it, unsure of what to expect. "Dear Mike, I've tried every way I know to reach you, but nothing seems to work. This will be my last attempt. I promise. I know I've hurt you in ways I can never take back. I know I've destroyed the trust we had, and I hate myself for it. What I did wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal of everything we built together. And I'll carry that guilt with me for the rest of my life." I wanted to explain myself, but I realize now that explanations don't matter. Excuses don't matter. What matters is that I broke your heart, and no amount of apologies or desperate gestures can undo that. You were the best thing in my life. The only thing that made me feel truly safe, truly seen. And I threw it all away because I was too selfish, too reckless, to realize what I had until it was gone. I'm leaving this city. I need to get away from here, from everything that reminds me of you and what I've done. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I hope that wherever I end up, I can find a way to be better. To be someone who deserves the kind of love you gave me. I know I'll never earn your forgiveness, and I don't expect it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. For all of it. Goodbye, Mike. Love. Lila. I stared at the letter for a long time, the weight of her words settling over me like a heavy blanket. Part of me felt relief. Relief that she was finally letting go, that she was moving on and giving me the space I so desperately needed. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, felt a pang of sadness. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer of my desk. I didn't know why I kept it, but throwing it away felt wrong somehow, like erasing the last trace of what we once had. That night, I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker against the dark sky. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure, a quiet acceptance that things were truly over. The pain was still there, and I knew it would take time to heal. But at least now, I could finally start to move forward. Lila was gone, and with her went the chaos and heartbreak she'd brought into my life. All that was left was the promise of a new beginning, a chance to rebuild, to find myself again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful, not for what had been, but for what could be, for the life that waited just beyond the horizon.